While Caleb's setting some things up, I told you guys tonight one of the thing we're going to talk about is communication. And believe it or not, communication is one of the most important things in marriage. Communication is one of those things that can cause lots of problems in marriage. But 100% of married couples, even happily married couples, have communication and conflict problems. And as you discovered through your homework this past week, bad communication is one of the biggest barriers to intimacy in your marriage. I would add bad communication can be one of the biggest barriers to the two of you reconnecting through what we're doing in Re-Engage. The topics that lie ahead in the future of the books that you hold, an important part of all of them will be you communicating with your spouse. So I'm glad that they put this one so early in the book so that we can kind of tackle it. It's interesting, though, when you think about communication being so important, most of us know little about it, or worse yet, we have some misunderstandings. Some of us wrongly believe the goal of communication is to make sure we're heard. How many of you kind of have held to that for a very long time? I was, for the longest time, told that I should have been a lawyer, not a pastor, because I like to win and I like to be heard. And so I've had a very poor understanding of communication. The actual goal of communication is understanding. Most of us do not understand the impact of our words. James had some rather tough stuff to say about our tongue in James chapter 3. He actually says, "How great a forest is set ablaze by such a small fire. The tongue is a fire, a world of unrighteousness. The tongue is set among our members, staining the whole body, setting on fire the entire course of life, and set on fire by hell." Have you ever heard somebody speak so well of your tongue? I mean, it's like we don't really think about how destructive our words can be. What we say and how we say it matters. It's going to be that way in your relationships. Some couples wrongly assume their relationship is healthy because they don't fight. Here in a few, you're going to hear from Pastor McGee and his wife, and they're going to talk about one of the patterns, destructive patterns of communication called avoidance. Well, if 100% of couples struggle with communication and conflict in their marriage, and you have no conflict in your marriage, chances are you're avoiding something. Chances are you're choosing not to deal with things that you probably should deal with. You should sit down and talk about. But our misunderstandings lead to us not dealing with it. Most of us have never thought about giving structure to our communication and conflict resolution. If you have children, you have ground rules in your house. There's nothing wrong with having some ground rules with how you're going to communicate with one another, especially when you're dealing with some conflict in your marriage. So laying some ground rules is important. Many Christians wrongfully think that because Ephesians 4:26 tells us to not let the sun go down on our anger, that we have to deal with our conflict before we go to bed. It is right to not let the sun go down on your anger, but that doesn't say you can't let the sun go down on your conflict. There's a difference between the two. There are times when it is not the right time for you to try to resolve. When I'm hungry, that is not the time for my wife and I to work through conflict. When we are lost in the car, that is not the time for you two to try to go, "I'm going to resolve the conflict now." That's just a bad time when you're tired. So there is a right time for you to go, "Wait, I'm going to wait." The right thing to do is go, "Hey, maybe let's wait till later. Maybe let's wait till after we eat dinner. Maybe we wait till tomorrow." That's okay. So our misunderstanding, though, sometimes thinks we have to dive right into it. Another one is, and we're going to talk about that now, we don't recognize our negative communication patterns. So for the rest of the evening, I'm going to let you hear from John and Pam McGee, and they're going to share a little bit about this negative communication pattern. So turn your attention to the screens, if you will.
Well, hey guys, tonight we want to talk about communication in marriage. And this is a topic that we're incredibly passionate about and is incredibly important. And in fact, the number one predictor of divorce in marriage is the inability to resolve conflict. This is a really big deal. studies have actually, they've done some research and some studies that are really interesting. They'll hook electrodes up to couples and watch them just communicate and talk or even fight. And they can tell with almost 90% accuracy who's going to be married 4 to 6 years from now based purely on the way they communicate. It doesn't have anything to do with whether their parents are still married, how much money they made, education, nothing, based purely on the way they communicate. Communication in marriage is a really big deal.
Yeah, it is. And then to us on a personal level, it's a big deal. We had been married about 5 or 6 years, and I would say our marriage was good. We didn't fight or yell much, but there was just some growth there. And as we started learning about communication, teaching on it, talking with our friends about it, we just saw a huge increase in the way that when we did have conflict, how quickly we resolved it. We actually talked about things we had never talked about before, and just the growth and the oneness that it's brought in our marriage has been huge. And so it's a really big deal to us. And really, we came to understand that the goal of communication is not to be right, not to win the argument. The goal of communication is mutual understanding, just to understand your spouse. And in a verse, it's James 1:19, and it says, "Be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry."
Yeah, it's a great progression, right? Be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry, which points to that idea of mutual understanding. And I think if the goal was of communication was to get your point across, that verse would read absolutely backwards, right? So get good and angry, then get your point across, and then be quiet, see if they understood what you're saying, right? And instead, we are to fight really hard to understand, both to understand our spouse and to communicate in a way that they can understand so that we can be at a place of this mutual understanding. And that's the goal of communication, okay? So what we're gonna do is I wanna give you a kind of 4 negative communication patterns. We're gonna kind of talk through some stuff. And here's the deal. You're gonna be really tempted to be thinking about the person that you're sitting next to. When we say something or we give an example, you're gonna wanna nudge them. You're gonna wanna like draw arrows. That's what I've been trying to tell you. I didn't know what to call it, but that's what you do. And what I want you to do is to think about yourself. Okay? Spend your best energies thinking about yourself. Do I do that? How does that show up? What would it look like to gain ground in that area? Okay? And then if you have any calories left over as you think, then you can think about your spouse, but really focus in on yourself. Okay? So the first one of the very first negative communication pattern is withdrawal and avoidance. Okay? And that's the unwillingness to get in or stay with important conversations. Okay? Unwillingness to either have the conversation in the first place or to stay with it. And so a lot of times what will happen is there's something important and we're having this conversation and one or both of us would say, I'm done. And so that might be physically walking out of the room. That might just kind of, just saying, hey, I'm not having this anymore. That would be withdrawal. And then avoidance would be when you know there's a conversation that needs to happen and you decide and kind of make a conscious effort, we are not going there, right? We're not even gonna get to that place. And so, Pam and I have joked that I can be kind of like this train conductor, avoidance is more my deal than withdrawal. And so, I know when Pam says, hey, we need to talk about something. If you've been married a while, you know exactly where this train's headed, right? And so I know she wants to go here, and I will just kind of keep flipping the tracks so we don't get over to this thing here, So suddenly now I'm really interested in the lawn, and the in-laws and all this kind of stuff. Let's talk about that. Let's don't talk about this thing here. That's avoidance. So either physically leaving would be, or shutting down would be withdrawal, or avoiding and not having that discussion that we really, really need to have.
Right. And so the way to fix this, if this is your negative bent, the way to fix this is just to see the importance of resolving conflict, so much so that you're willing to stay in the hard conversation. There's going to be awkward, intense conversations, but just seeing the importance of it and the true peace that comes on the other side, and so being willing to stay in the conversation. And then thinking through and just being self-aware enough to know, why is it hard to stay in that conversation if you are an avoider or a withdrawer? And then if you're sitting by someone who tends to withdraw or avoid, think about yourself. What is it about me and the way I do that, or my timing is poor, that make it easier for John just to say, you know what, I'm going to avoid or withdraw there. What could I do to make it easier for him to approach me?
Yeah, that's good. So that's the first one, withdraw and avoidance.
Yeah, the second one is escalation. And that's just when partners respond negatively toward each other, continuing to up the ante so it becomes more and more hostile. So it's the classic, yelling, just like you would picture yelling at each other, throwing things maybe. Or it could also be a little more subtle. We don't yell at our house too often, except yelling at the kids to come here. But we do kind of excel at sarcasm. And we can just kind of get that last jab in, kind of one-up each other. I'm going to get the last word in before this is over. And so that's also escalation.
Excel at it. You make it sound like if it was a sport, we would, be a gold medal. We probably would.
Pretty sarcastic.
And sarcasm. So again, so kind of this angry outburst, right? That would be escalation. And so you're talking, and it's just kind of the tone just keeps going up and up and up until somebody's yelling. That would be a form of escalation. Or it's just kind of this one-up in terms of the severity of the things that we're talking about, and some of the comebacks and the put-downs and all those kind of things. And so it could start sometimes, right? Somebody's 5 minutes late, and then it becomes, you're always late. You're so irresponsible. I can't believe I married you. I hate your mom, and just kind of all this deal. And it started with, hey, you were 5 minutes late. And a lot of times, if we'll think about it, we'll go, man, how do we even get to this place? What was it that started that? And if we've kind of moved through that progression, then we're escalators, okay?
Right.
And so kind of the way around that is just to slow down and call a timeout. You just slow down and you say, you know what, I love you more than kind of blowing my top or saying things that I'm gonna regret later and that will hurt you now. And so can we just kind of hit the pause button and let us both just kind of get in a better place. So we can go away and pray. We can read our Bibles. We can call somebody and say, hey, this is where we are going. I want to honor God in this conversation. Will you help me? And so it could be, hey, we just need 5 minutes. It could be 15 minutes. It could be, let's wait till the kids go down until we can have this conversation, okay? And so that's the way you kind of keep it from getting to that place, is to call it a timeout and make sure you're under control of the Holy Spirit, okay? It's not a strategy for you withdrawers and avoiders to not have to have the conversation,
right.
But it is a strategy for those of you that tend to escalate, so you can keep it from getting to a bad place, okay? So any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's good, yeah.
Okay, great. So the next one is negative interpretation, okay? Negative interpretation. That's when someone believes that the motives of the other person are more negative than is really the case. And so, we're just kind of questioning when they say something or when they ask something, we're wondering, hey, what's behind that? I think you're really trying to get me there. And so, Pam and I were laughing that when we've got hundreds of these, but just a real quick one. When we were, first married, little kids, Pam would call almost every single day about 4 o'clock. And I'd see her on caller ID, and she'd call, and I knew what she was going to ask every day. It was, what time are you coming home? And so I'd pick up the phone, and I'd tell her, I think I can be home at 5:30 or 6 or whatever it was. And I remember just thinking, like, she is really trying, she's frustrated with me, and she's trying to say things about me and assassinate my character. What she's really saying is, you're not even working, are you? You got a cup of coffee in your hand, and you're walking around telling jokes, checking, the sports stats. I'm at home dying with these little kids. Will you hurry up, wrap it up, and get home? And I'm just kind of like, sure, that's what she's saying every day at 4 o'clock. And so she didn't say that, but that's the way I interpret it. That's a great example of negative interpretation.
Yeah. And as you're thinking about this, as you become more aware of it, oftentimes this plays out in areas where you're insecure, plays out in areas where I'm insecure. And so we've got 4 kids. Obviously, I've got to cook for 6 every day, but I'm not the best cook. I've got a friend in here who's a great cook. I can't compare to her. But just that's a little bit of insecurity. And so when John comes home and says, what's for dinner? I can hear what's for dinner. Or I can hear, hey, do I need to pick up pizza on the way home? Because dinner last night was just not cutting it. Maybe a bag of burgers would be better than what you made. And so just be aware of areas where you're insecure.
Yeah, it really tends to show itself in those insecure moments, and subtly just shows up in our conversation, and will completely derail a conversation that otherwise could have been really, really fruitful. It's just even a question, a nonverbal, or a statement. It's really like, hey, where did you get that shirt? Can be taken negatively.
Yeah, or when's the last time you were at the gym?
Nice. There you go. Great.
I just want to know when he went to the gym.
There you go.
Really.
That's it.
Yeah.
So how do you fix that?
So the way to fix this, is to believe the best. So this is your spouse standing next to you. Believe the best about them. And if you can't, then ask for clarification. I really want to believe that you're just asking what's for dinner, but I know those Brussels sprouts last night were not a win. Let me ask what you were really saying.
Yeah, that's good. And so back to the phone, conversation. Literally every day at 4 o'clock, I see my wife on caller ID, and I start to get angry. Okay, in case you're wondering, that's not a really good sign for a marriage when you see your spouse and you start to get really frustrated on caller ID. And so I remember just picking up the phone and just saying, "Hey Pam, when you call like every single day at 4 o'clock and ask what time I'm getting home, what do you mean?" And there was this long, awkward pause. Obviously, she had no idea what I was even talking about, didn't understand the question. I can see her just looking at the phone going, "What are you talking about?" And she said it real slow. She goes, "What I mean is, what time are you coming home?" and she said, "I've got kids, and some of them need to be places, dinner. I'm just trying to manage it all. It'd be helpful to know when you're home." And so I just had to say, "You know what, man, just will you forgive me? Because I know I've been giving you, just kind of grief and just this, I've not been kind when I've picked up the phone because I thought you were really subtly attacking." And so I believe that's what you had my best and your best in mind. Will you forgive me for reacting negatively? And so it shows up in communication and conflict resolution a lot, especially if we're in a bad place or especially around sensitive areas in our life. So,
yeah. The last little part on that, if you do ask for clarification and you just can't believe the best, if you really were trying to get a jab in, because oftentimes that's the case, just own that. And so if he really was trying to say dinner was horrible, just, hey, will you forgive me for that? But believe the best. Ask for clarification if you can't, and then if you were, just own that and be humble.
That's good.
Great.
So last one of these is invalidation, okay? Invalidation. These are subtle or direct put-downs of either the thoughts or the feelings or the character of another person, okay? And so this was the area that I was a fantastic invalidator. I was good at all these, but I really excelled at invalidation. And so most conversations Pam and I could have, but there tended to just be a few that all of a sudden, like the competitive nature in me came out and I had to win. I could not be wrong. And I was gonna say or do or argue or use logic to be right in these situations. The one I was thinking about earlier was our very first road trip. And Pam's family, they said, you don't put you don't put miles on your car, on long road trips, you rent a car. And I just remember going, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. And just began just to like come at this like it was life and death until I was right. So I could say that your way is stupid, my way is right. Or your thoughts are wrong, my thoughts are right. Your feelings are wrong. You shouldn't feel that way, and here's why. And so I would kind of pit it in this win-lose kind of scenario. And most of the time I was right. Most of the time I would win. Like I said, I was really good. And I thought, life was really good. I thought I was winning. In reality, what was happening was there just became these little topics that Pam wouldn't bring up because she knew it just wasn't worth it. Like I was never going to relent. I was never going to go, you know what, that's a great point. I was just going to keep going until I could get her to capitulate. And so if you do that, if that's who you are, the category that falls under is invalidation. And it's really, really detrimental to a marriage.
Yeah, and so the way to fix this is just to understand and just believe that the goal of communication, like we talked about, is mutual understanding. It's not like John thought, and like I often think too, it's not to win, to be right, to get my way. The goal is to understand my spouse. Not always agree, but just to understand where each other's coming from. And when you do that, that will so offset this need and desire to win and to invalidate what your spouse is saying.
That's really good. So, an easy way to remember all of those is to kind of have those, the categories. If you'll take them all, withdrawal and avoidance, escalation, negative interpretation, and validation, take the first 4 letters. Just an easy way to remember that it spells weenie, okay? So in communication, in conflict, don't be a weenie. And just having those categories, having those names is really helpful, right? Because if your spouse comes to you, Pam said, hey, you are lousy at communication. I don't even, I can't talk to you at all. Well, it's kind of like, where do you even start with that, right? I'll just give up and watch SportsCenter. But if she says, hey, you know what? It feels like you keep invalidating I know what that means. That's something that I can work on. And so having those categories, looking at yourself, and then being able to explain to your spouse, hey, I think you're escalating here. Don't want to go there. Would love if we could kind of get to a good place where we can have that conversation. The categories will be incredibly helpful.
Yeah, and a technique that we talked about that's really helpful, just a practical way to help you move toward this, is a technique called active listening. There's some rules that go with it. Basically, it's just coming at a conversation where you're seeking to understand each other. So you take turns talking, and when John is talking, my goal is totally just to listen to what he's saying and be able to articulate that back to him. It's not to say you're wrong, rebut, give my side of the story, but it's just to listen and understand what he's saying. And then when I'm talking, he's doing the same. And so you come to the end of this, maybe you don't agree, but you understand where each other's coming from. And so you've reached that goal of mutual understanding. And you're living out that James 1:19. Be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry.
Yeah, and so like Pam said early on, like in this talk, this has really been one of the game changers for our marriage. I can take you back early on in our marriage to a discussion we were having. We began to kind of implement this stuff, and it was a game changer for us. And it can be for you. Early on, we joked, we didn't really kind of communicate. At times, we had like these Civil War musket battles, with each other. So as she's talking, I'm not really listening to understand. I'm looking for really great rebuttals, So I'd kind of, I'd put the bullet in there and put the gunpowder, and I'm just reloading the whole time she's talking. Like, I've got a great comeback for that. This is going to really hurt. I'm going to bring this up about what you did 2 years ago. Are you done? Boom, And then as soon as I'm done, she's got a great answer for me as well. And so, you know what? We're not sitting next to our enemy. Right? We're sitting next to God's son or God's daughter. And they deserve our best when it comes to communication and conflict resolution. Your marriage deserves the best. God deserves the best, that you honor him in the way that you communicate. And it will be a game changer if you'll wade in these waters and really begin to kind of get a handle on your own negative communication patterns. Thanks so much.
Pretty good, isn't it? I mean, you never really think that much about your communication, your negative communication patterns. I know for me, I have been through that lesson several times, and it still hasn't sunk in that well. My wife and I get to teach Merge, which is a premarital class that kind of precedes re-engage. And so a lot of these principles are taught in there, and every time I go through it, I'm like, oh my goodness, I got a lot of growing to do. But the cool thing is these are things we can do. So you can't be like, hey, I can't do this. No, actually you can. You might not be great at communicating, but you can grow in your communication with your spouse. And so as you guys spend some time around your tables talking, remember that. And let's get open and honest and really let God start dealing with us in these ways and changing us. So enjoy your time with your groups.